So I'm not alone in believing that right now the government is not acting on a good practice with regards to science. Some of the decisions that they're making don't actually make sense. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and I think I think there's also with science, unfortunately, like anything else, there's always conflicting evidence, right? And I think what's happening now is we're hearing politicians, we're hearing local, chief public health officers, we're hearing the Ontario public health officer and the federal public health officer, and they're all saying different things.
All right, everyone. My name is John Wiseman. Welcome back to the A Wise Man Listens podcast. And today's episode 8, and we have our wonderful guest, Dave Carey. Dave, if you want to take the opportunity to introduce yourself, that'd be amazing.
Yeah, John, thanks for having me on. So Dave Carey, based in Ottawa. I guess the easiest sense of the word is that I'm a lobbyist for a living. So try to advocate for public policy with the federal government in particular. And currently I'm the vice president of government and industry relations for a large agriculture trade association and a financial institution.
Wow, that's a pretty good introduction, buddy. So great job. And, we've known each other for a long time. We met at Brock University. I don't even know what year that was, 2005 maybe, 2006 or something like that. But it's been a long time, and we've spoken on and off throughout those years. And, recently you've been very helpful in helping guide me and giving me some kind of tips and ways I can advocate for my industry in the city of Toronto and, the province of Ontario regarding these lockdowns that are going on, and just kind of trying to maneuver my way throughout communication styles and how I best approach speaking to my MPs and things like that as a constituent. So I really do appreciate your help in that, and I've definitely learned a lot. Unfortunately, one of the things I've learned is that you can say everything you want to say, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get the answers you're looking for, right?
Yeah, absolutely, and it's and I think there's a lot of uncertainty too. Right now with COVID and everything, it is kind of unprecedented. But I think it does speak to the need, though. I think just on as a business owner, or even just concerned citizen, on just an annual basis to have meeting with your elected officials is just something you do.
Yeah.
And it might sound daunting to those who've never done it before, but I certainly encourage everyone, including my father-in-law, who's a small business owner. Those elected officials can directly impact you for good or bad, right? And for all your listeners and those in your industry and other industries, that own their own business, meeting with your member of parliament and your member of provincial parliament, depending on where you are in the country, that term is different. It should just be part of your annual business cycle. It's just a part of doing business because, as I'm sure you experienced, it's really tough to ask for help when you don't have a relationship there, right? It's like, try to build a fire department when there's a fire, right? It's when there's an issue, having a pre-existing relationship, it goes a long ways, and it's just something that I think people take for granted until there is an issue, right? And then it becomes obviously very, very pressing.
Yeah, exactly. I completely agree, and I realize now how important it is to kind of build relationships in this kind of sector of government and really foster that and have it almost as a best business practice on a annual kind of cycle like you've mentioned. And that's something that I'll definitely be implementing. I mean, I got the opportunity to speak to all of my local MPs, and we had, legit conversations. It just so happens that all my local MPs are the NDP, right? So they're not necessarily in power. So it's not. They were able to kind of advocate, but they maybe get a 15-second spurt of opportunity to speak on a specific day and topic, right? Unlike, if my MPs happen to be those in power, maybe that would have even been a better situation. But again, this is just me kind of riffing, and I don't really know this world as well as you do, so correct me if I'm wrong. So yeah, man, I think it's you've been extremely helpful. And can you tell our listeners a little bit about the story with regards to your father and and how having that relationship kind of benefited it. Because I think that a lot of people in my industry and other industries that are being impacted would really benefit from understanding how impactful that can actually be.
Yeah, sure. And you're right. First, but your opposition MPs are certainly different than the government. There are opposition MPPs, and then there's also the dynamic of the Ontario government as a majority government, right? So they don't need the support of opposition to do things. Where federally right now we have a minority government where the opposition has a lot more sway because one party doesn't have enough votes. So the dynamics change majority to minority. It was my father-in-law. He owns businesses in the GTA, and oftentimes what happens is, I think regulators and bureaucrats, that for the most part, are trying to do the right thing, but they don't necessarily see outside their silos, right? They're very much, they're in their cubicle, they're doing their work in Ottawa or elsewhere, but they don't necessarily see the big picture or put, all the correlations of, will this decision impact this industry? My father-in-law is in the music industry, music equipment, that sort of thing. So a number of years ago, the federal government, Environment and Climate Change Canada, changed a rule called CITES, which is around the Convention for the National Treaty of Endangered Species. So good things, right? We don't want poaching, we don't want ivory coming into Canada, all those sorts of things. And there's an issue with rosewood, which is predominantly grown in Africa, and that is deforestation and basically bad management practices with the harvesting of it. So the government decided that we're going to stop for the import or export of any rosewood in and out of Canada. Yeah. Unfortunately, as a vintage guitar dealer, pre-1970, almost every guitar was made from rosewood at a time when rosewood was not endangered. So they kind of got caught up in just a regulation trying to do the right thing, but operationalizing it, they didn't think of the small businesses. Yeah. So I just helped navigate him and my father-in-law, my brother-in-law through it, as far as, go meet with your MPs, go meet with your MPPs, and just raise this as an issue and see if there's traction. And I think as a small business owner, it's not only your postal code of your home, it's also the postal code of your businesses, right? So they were quite proactive in getting out and doing that, and it was easier, pre-COVID. And the other things that they did was just put, I identified the right person in government that oversees this. And anyone can do that. There's a website called GEDS, GEDS.ca. And as long as you know the name of someone, you can look them up and you can figure out where they fall within the reporting structure, what their title is, who they report to, who reports into them. And it's a way to basically figure out, if you're having an issue, can you figure out who the right person, right? Because it's about identifying your target. Yeah. So I just looked it up using a publicly available website and said, this is the person in charge of CITES. You should send a formal letter describing your business and the impact of these regulations and request a meeting. And a week or two later, that bureaucrat was willing to meet with them. They sat down, they had that meeting, they had the support of their MPs, which they referenced in the meeting. Their MP made overage to the Minister of Environment at the time too, while they're in the House, just essentially walked up and said, hey, I've got this issue. And they were granted an exemption and were allowed to issue their own permits. So they were allowed to do that, and the reason is that they were proactive, but they took action. It helped they had some advice, but it shows that if they had done nothing, they would have been stumbling to try to get permits from Environment and Climate Change Canada, a department which a guitar dealership never deals with and has no pre-existing relationship with. Yeah, so it's an example of just you gotta be your own advocate, right? You really do, and you don't have to be an expert, but you gotta poke around. Squeaky wheel gets the oil oftentimes, yeah. And waiting for it to get figured out instead of taking action, it's not in my personality set, but especially as a business owner, they took action, and I told them what to do, but they had to do it. I couldn't be in the meetings because of my job. Yeah. I can't do that. I've got rules around that, and they were successful, and made for some fun family gatherings after that, kind of the toast of the dinner. So it was good to help.
That's awesome, man, and I think it's an important story to share because I don't think anyone knows this information, right? Like, this is not common information that you're going to find amongst any entrepreneurs or any small business owners, even medium-sized business owners. With that being said, in the current situation that Ontario is in, how far do you think a small business can really get with regards to advocating for themselves, especially a heavily impacted industry that is negatively impacted by the lockdowns. Like, do you think that there is even a point at this point to advocate and try to change some of the regulations, especially with what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really tough one, right? And I think, even, just seeing on social media this morning that we're expected to get another version of stay at home tomorrow issued, right?
Yeah.
So I think right now, as far as anything that is not, vaccine related, rapid testing related, I don't think there's a lot of bandwidth for it right now, unfortunately. I think that it doesn't mean that for, your friends and colleagues that are in your line of work that you still can't request to meet with your local officials to just say, listen, I think it's all about how you position. Like, we understand that there's a pandemic. We understand that, public health is your number one concern. However, as a constituent, as a small business owner, we need to be made sure that, as soon as it's safe to do so, that we are on the fast track to reopening. And I think, it's all about how you have that conversation, because you don't want to come off tone deaf, because you never know if that MP's aunt or something is in a long-term care home, or that MPP. But I think still making the case for yourself is important, right? Because just waiting for your industry to get recognized, or the importance of it to just happen naturally, I think is, you're leaving too much outside of your control. So, I mean, who knows what's going to happen? I mean, this looks like this lockdown, they're going to be closing big box stores, which is something that the Canadian Federation of Independent Business has been advocating for. I mean, to me, the idea that I can't have a beer on a socially distanced outdoor patio, but we can all go to the mall, doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But I would be, I guess, at this point, instead of railing against the current regulations, because they are so in flux until the vaccine rollout is further along, is to, and I know it's a hard thing to do, but look towards the future, right? As far as having a relationship, should there ever be another issue, public health related, whatever related, that you've got an MP, an MPP who you've built some foundation with, that knows that you're reasonable, that you're constructive, that you're not there to yell at them, because it's a tough line of work that they're in, and that you're there to build a forward-looking relationship. And those MPs and MPPs, one, they're professional meeting takers, and two, they work for you. As your constituent, they want to show up for you, because you have to decide if you take their name at the next election. So it's a tough question. I would just say it's all about how you frame it, right? Like, look towards, especially for you in the health industry, like, this is a good thing for people, right? It's this is something that you're offering as a public health good. But I think at this point, with things so in flux, they're being probably still hashed over right now, but look towards the future, I'd say. And I know that's hard to do when bills are piling up, but it's, the political realities what they are, and sometimes railing against them doesn't get you very far. And you don't want to appear tone deaf if you want a future relationship.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, that's really good advice, and I think any listener, anyone who's a business owner, small business owner, or if their industry is being heavily impacted with the lockdowns and the pandemic in Ontario, should definitely heed that advice with regards to creating relationships with their MPs and advocating for themselves. I'm just going to pause this for a sec, because my TV is on and I didn't realize it, and I just want to make sure I'm not picking up any background sounds. So just give me 1 sec, okay?
Yep.
Good old TV. Awesome. Okay. Thanks. That was definitely a good breakdown. So can I get more of your perspective? Because I honestly do respect a lot of your insight when it goes with regards to, the perception of the government and what they're likely facing, what they're likely experiencing. Because, as a small business owner, obviously it's very easy for me to hear and see my perspective, and also the people that I'm surrounded by. Can you kind of help me better see or better understand some of the challenges that my local and provincial government are likely experiencing, so I can better understand why I feel like they're not listening?
Yeah, I'll try to draw So maybe I'll start, just using kind of an example of how I would approach it federally, just because it's concrete, and then try to, apply some of that, same kind of real time to your question.
Okay.
So, my day job, I represent agriculture, predominantly prairies-based agriculture. Canola, the largest agriculture commodity, with $29.9 billion a year. So big economic impact. So you've got that opening statement, right? Why you're important, for your listeners. I'm a small business owner. I employ X employees in, X riding, and I'm your constituent. That's your sort of opening salvo. But in the current context, again, federally, I look at it is that there's only 62 seats in the House of Commons across all the prairies,
Yeah.
where 20 million tons of canola is produced a year. There's 338 seats in the House of Commons, so there's 122 in Ontario alone, federally. So why would a minority Liberal government who knows the prairies don't vote Liberal want to talk to me or want to hear about our concerns, knowing that we represent, typically our constituents that we represent, don't vote for them?
Yeah.
So it's that same sort of conundrum, right? And I think the way you have to go about it is it depends on the situation. You have to be fluid, but leading with economic impact is always good, or leading with anything that you can draw a parallel to that they will care about. Leading that that you were there for a constructive dialogue, a constructive forward-looking dialogue. I think if I was in your situation, Ontario-wise, and we kind of referenced it a few minutes ago, what policymakers hate is going into a meeting with them and you're looking in the rearview mirror the whole time, and you're rehashing things that have happened in the past. It's okay to reference that as sort of like the goalpost, or your frame of reference you're entering the meeting with. Like, this was an issue and we're here to fix it. But you have to quickly pivot to looking at the windshield. Continuing on the car metaphor, because why should they care, right? And I think it's different when you're talking to your local MP or MPP. But if you're talking to, for like the Minister of Health's office, or the Minister of Finance, it's about telling it in a way that matters to them. So constituents is important. All politics are local. It's really about being constructive, because they get lambasted, they get yelled at, whether it's social media or in person, a lot. So I think really setting we're here for constructive dialogue. We're here to work together to build up and out.
Yeah.
And I think it's trying to find unlikely allies too, right? And I think the other thing that you can do that we do federally too is we have a Minister of Agriculture, we have a Minister of Trade. You can't just go to those people over and over again. There's 338 members of Parliament, most of whom are not in rural or agriculture areas where my members are. So, but you can also look to who else would have a vested interest in hearing my concerns. And while House committee structures are a bit different when you get provincially, there's standing committees that deal with particular issues, and there's members of provincial parliament for you that get tasked to be on these committees. I don't know all the provincial committees as well, but for example, there's standing committees federally on health, on the environment, on agriculture, on trade, on finance, on industry. There's less of them provincially, but those members of parliament have a responsibility to sit on those committees. Those are the committees that do studies related to their field of interest. If legislation passes second reading in the House, it gets referred to their committee to go detailed through. So you do have a cohort of MPPs that have a vested interest in health. So for your industry, for the fitness industry, have a vested interest in that, because they're the ones that look at any legislation relates to health. They're the ones that do any studies that relate to health. So the biggest thing, just like with the father-in-law example, is you have to identify your target audience, right? And just going to talk to, my MP federally is Ottawa South, and so Liberals both federally and provincially. I wouldn't go talk to them about agriculture, even though I'm their constituent, because it doesn't make sense to. However, just outside of Ottawa is quite rural, so Glengarry Prescott Russell, MP Frank Drouin, I talk to him a lot because he has a vested interest, right? His riding is agriculture based. So knowing, I guess, who your champions can be based on, well, one, all their bios are publicly available, so you could always spend some time just figuring out, is there anyone here that was an athlete, or was a college athlete, or has a degree in kinesiology, or someone that gets it. And if it's not health industry specific, then it's okay. Well, maybe they're into nutrition. Maybe they're just a scientist and they get science. And I think the one thing that I would say, if I was, communicating with this government in Ontario, is that science is not a buffet. You don't get to pick and choose when and where you look at the science, right? All of a sudden, big pharma is good. Well, there's been a chill on innovation in the pharma and life science sector and agriculture too for 20 years because of Canada really being pretty cold to the idea of big pharma or big agriculture operating Canada. It's okay elsewhere, but not in our backyard sort of mentality.
Yeah.
So I think really pushing for that. Science is science, and that decisions that impact businesses should be made based on sound science, right?
Yeah.
And I think we're seeing an absence of that right now.
Okay, so that brings up my next point actually wonderfully. And with that being said, so I'm not alone in believing that right now the government is not acting on a good practice with regards to science. Some of the decisions that they're making don't actually make sense. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and I think they're I think there's also with science, unfortunately, like anything else, there's always conflicting evidence, right? And I think what's happening now is we're hearing politicians, we're hearing local, chief public health officers, we're hearing the Ontario public health officer and the federal public health officer, and they're all saying different things. So I think that is what creates a lack of understanding, and I think that's what creates mistrust. The fact that Dr. Etchus here in Ottawa versus Dr. Tam versus whoever are all saying different things.
Yeah.
There really has been a lack of coordination, and I think while the science might not be in on some things, I think that we have not seen in the last year the proper things to be done to be addressed, whether it's ramping up contact tracing or understanding outside transmission.
Yeah.
I'm not a scientist, but I think when you're dealing with a health issue and you're dealing with science, that you have to say it. If they're shutting everything down because they're trying to change behavior, then say that's why you're doing it.
Yeah.
Because the last thing that any of us want is mistrust in science, because that is the foundation of what's going to get us out of this pandemic.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I do believe that the majority of people, people who don't even have a background in science are or have been living in this situation now long enough to have been exposed to every other country's experiences and tactics in getting the virus under control to a degree, right? I mean, no country really has the virus fully under control, but to a point where they're able to get back some resemblance of normality. And so with that being said, we aren't all experts, but we know a decent amount of information to the point where we know that contact tracing, rapid testing is really valuable. And to not be implementing that does seem like a really big misstep with regards to how our money is being spent during this situation, where that money is being spent, and what actions are being put in place by the government to protect the public. And then that, for me, builds mistrust, because I'm like, if the reality is that you are trying to protect the public, then why are you not using the most powerful methods to do so? And if the reality is to protect the public, then why are you removing things that actually improve the public's health, but keeping things in that destroy the public's health? Now, let's say you're closing gyms. I understand that there's the fear that in an indoor setting, heavy breathing, you can spread the virus. 100% I agree, but that doesn't mean there's no solutions. And then going into things like, I understand that liquor stores need to be or remain open because, if someone's an alcoholic and all of a sudden you completely cut their intake, that can cause some severe health outcomes. And, the hospitals are already overpacked as is, or so they say. And I'm not against believing that. I believe it's possible, and I believe that's possible because I know how poorly funded hospitals have been over the last 15 years. So I can truly believe that they are not well staffed, or their bed capacity just isn't where it should be. So would you say that this? Because I believe that the reason why we are still in this situation now is no longer about the virus. I think this is because of poor long-term funding to the hospitals. Would you agree or disagree with that?
It's when it comes to health spending, it's federally allocated to the provinces and up to the provinces to do what they will with it. And I think we've seen I think while there was failures in the health system before, I think all the ones that were pre-existing have been really brought to light because of this, whether it's number of ICU beds or registered nurses or the situation in long-term care homes. So hopefully these are things that we can no longer ignore because every government in perpetuity in Ontario, for example, has known that these issues exist, but it's never been a front burner issue, right? And I think that's a problem that all governments deal with is just, I said there's just only so much bandwidth.
Yeah.
I think, my personal opinion as to why Canada is where we are now relative to the US or the UK being further ahead, despite the fact that they had far worse starts, right, because of population density, is that they are countries who have, over the last 20, 25 years have valued innovation and have capacity now to produce vaccines at home.
Yeah.
Where in Canada, we have maybe one or two. There's been disputes of whether or not they can actually do mRNA, for example, but that's a fundamental issue. Canada, in a lot of ways, we're blessed in so many ways, whether it's agriculture, food, or natural resources, as a net exporter, right? But when it comes to at-home self-sufficiency, when it relates to a pandemic, we have nothing. We rely on either bidding for vaccines globally or the generosity of the United States, and that is not. I think that is because the only way out of this is to vaccinate our way out of it, right? And I think I spoke to it earlier, and if I reflect on my industry being agriculture, so science-based, that whether it is anything from life science companies developing biotechnology or life science companies developing herbicides and pesticides, because that's how you produce food in bulk, or if it's about the latest innovations. Canada has, over the last 25 years, has really put a chill on that, which is why there's no Johnson and Johnson or Pfizer or Moderna facility here.
Yeah.
Like, why wouldn't they want their? Why isn't it? Why isn't there? And the reason, I think, is because when it was convenient to do so, we kind of turned our backs on science, and that big pharma is bad, and that the idea is that Monsanto and GMOs are bad, and even though the science doesn't say that, and now we're in a position where, all right, science is good, mRNA is GMO on steroids, right? And then now everyone's like, I want to get that in me ASAP, right? And insulin is a genetic modification, right? And that's key for anyone with diabetes. So I think I really hope coming out of this that there's an appreciation for science is good and innovation is good, but innovation is good everywhere. It's not just good in your cell phone.
Yeah.
It's important for agriculture. It's important for health. It's important for everything. So, hospitals are certainly an issue, but I think right now, rapid testing, if you're negative, other things should perhaps be open. But I think really it's a matter of, we're only way out of this is to vaccinate. And I hope going after this, that provincial and federal governments, they have a minister or a parliamentary secretary for pandemics that are encouraged to incentivize the Pfizers and Johnson & Johnson and AstraZenecas of the world to build facilities here, because this comes around maybe every 100 years or so. 100 years from now, whatever, or even sooner than that, Canada's not self-sufficient, and we've let our grandchildren down, or great-grandchildren down, and yeah.
So, going to children, how do you think this is going to impact our children or even our children's children with regards to, the future, taxes, even behaviorally? Do you think this is going to have a long-term impact?
Yeah, the taxation one is one that I struggle with, being, on the fiscal side, where, I think that governments just keep getting bigger and bigger, typically, and really, government is really good at their core things, but we need to be looking at it's called alternative service delivery, where if there's areas the government should be overseeing, then we should create private sector jobs and let the government oversee it for quality control, whatever, an oversight function, but that it shouldn't be done by the government, because oftentimes when it comes to government, say if I wanted to buy a new monitor for my office, say it's $200, then I'm costing about $1,200 when you get all the requisite approvals and all the manager's signatures.
Wow.
So that sort of thing is, and I mean that's just that's not accurate, but the cost of a stapler sort of triples because you need to get approvals to buy a stapler.
That's crazy. Yeah.
So I think we need to look at what government is good at and where they can provide oversight and comfort to Canadians, but allow jobs to be created, private sector jobs, allow kind of that entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
When it comes to kids, I mean, I think kids are resilient. My oldest is 5.5. My youngest will be 2 this month. My youngest has had both of her birthdays in lockdown, right? Just us.
That's crazy.
My oldest is back in school. I think kids are resilient. I mean, I guess I'm more concerned with just the long-term financial implications of this pandemic as opposed to, at least for my kids at their age, because that's the only perspective I have.
Yeah.
If I was a teenager right now, I'm sure I would be struggling, with not being able to go out and be a teenager.
Yeah.
But the financial one is really concerning when I look at misspending, being something that my oldest is going to have to deal with every paycheck that she receives.
Yeah.
But I think, and as a society, we don't have to look back very far to see, a generation that went through the Spanish flu, the Great Depression, World War I, World War II, and perhaps even Vietnam or Korean wars, right? And there's some people that were involved in a number of those. So I think, but I also think that unlike this, there's stores that are never going to open up again, right? There's restaurants that are never going to come back. There's going to be some of those, strip malls that are going to are they ever going to be filled up again? Or are they going to be boarded up ghost towns?
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
that will have an impact on the communities, right?
Yeah.
And folks who've drained their close to retirement, right, and drained their life savings to get by.
Yeah, exactly. Obviously, as a small business owner, that's definitely one of the fears that we are facing is, are we going to be wiped out? And at that point, what's going to be left behind to make our communities special as they are, right? So have you experienced anything where mutual friends or colleagues or acquaintances of yours have had to shut down their restaurants, their businesses or retail shops, anything like that?
Yeah, a friend of ours in Ottawa here owns a fine dining restaurant, and so we've been there a couple of times when we're allowed to do so.
Yeah.
He's been very successful in pivoting. He's just a loyal following sort of thing where fine dining, but you pick it up and kind of take it home and warm up sort of thing has been successful.
Good.
But I've definitely, in speaking with him, it's been install PPE, glass things beside plexiglass,
Yeah.
whatever. Do that and you're safe. Okay, good. We'll invest. We're going to do that. Reduce your staff. Okay, we're going to do that. Invest in masks, all those sorts of things. Contact tracing, temperature checks. Done. Okay, now we're shutting down indoor dining. Build outdoors. Okay, I'm literally building an add-on to my patio because it's fine dining, right?
Yeah.
Okay, great. You're now closed.
Yeah.
Okay. So I've heard, he's an optimist, but that's got to be tough on him. I've got a friend who, we went to elementary school and high school together, and worked on Parliament Hill together, and so he's now in fundraising. He does fundraising for, political parties, campaigns, leadership races. Those things don't happen anymore.
Yeah.
Right? There isn't. There's no. So his entire line of work has changed, and
Exactly.
that's affected him big time as a. My father-in-law, brother-in-law's business. They have 3 storefront properties. They're not essential,
Yeah.
right? So they're pivoting to online. But I think the biggest issue that I've heard, across, that's kind of political fundraising, music industry, and fine dining is we can't pivot constantly. We can't be constantly reinventing how we do our business. We need continuity, right? We need to know that if we're ordering on Wednesday for a weekend service, that we're going to open on the weekend,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And I think so. Those are definitely ones that seen firsthand, and I think they've all sort of asked, going forward, and you and I have talked about this is, what do you do? And I'm hoping that industries like yours might get together and get more coordinated and look to the opportunities of having an association that represents the health industry so that they're front and center on a regular basis.
Yeah.
Because the thing that this pandemic has created is lobbying was up 40% over 2019 by the numbers, and 2019 was election year, but over 2018 we're up 20%. So 2020 there was more political meetings registered with the Commissioner for Lobbying than ever.
Wow.
And that's because so many individuals, whether their industries weren't properly represented or they're just a company that did not have any sort of relationships in Ottawa, and Ottawa was putting a lot of sending a lot of money out the doors, all scrambled to now have a presence in Ottawa on the Hill. And because of the pandemic, I've got a view of the Supreme Court from my office, but the pandemic, it's $22 in a Zoom account, and you can make yourself a lobbyist.
Exactly.
I mean, you might not be overly effective, but I think going forward, groups really, because, and you'll notice this as you go through your discussions, John, is okay. That's what OBF thinks. What does everyone else think?
Yeah.
Because risk aversion is high, right? Well, maybe this is what you're describing is only for your facility or your business, or maybe others in the industry don't. Good Life is a big example. Like maybe they feel the exact opposite of you. How do I know? So the validity of an association is looking at coordinated. You represent a holistic voice, right? When we speak on behalf of our 43,000 farmers.
Yeah.
It's a lot more impactful than Farmer X going in and saying something and Farmer Y going in and saying something.
Yeah.
So I think we're really going to look at this going forward as, risk management means you do what you have to do and you have those relationships in place. And there's a reason that sometimes some of those industries are so successful. It's not by mistake. It's that they are doing, I think the organization that did the most meetings in 2020 was close to 300 meetings with designated public office holders. My team and I did 184, and we were the sixth most active of any industry group. So of those 184 meetings, that gives us a pretty solid foundation that if there is an issue for our members, we've got a stable of individuals we can engage with, and maybe one isn't interested, but maybe one is. So I think going forward, we have to really be careful for industries that aren't properly represented to get coordinated and to get organized. You can create an association, you can create a board of directors, like-minded people that sit around. That way, when you speak, you're speaking on behalf of your industry, not your company. And I think that's what people like stories, but they want to know that your story is representative, and that if they're going to make a move that's going to benefit the industry, that there's something behind it from a policy perspective that's sound.
Yeah. So questions I have about being a lobbyist and your experiences being a lobbyist. I don't know how deep into certain stories you can go or you're allowed to go, but with your job role, how has it changed over the last year? I mean, compared to pre-COVID, were you doing a lot more traveling, for example, than you were now?
So I changed jobs in January 2020. I took a new role, newly created role here. Before that, I was the executive director and CEO of a smaller organization representing life science companies in the agriculture space. And I was Air Canada's Super Elite 100K. So I did like 65 flights in 2019.
Wow.
Trade missions to China, business in Australia. I was in the Middle East. I was in Jordan a couple times a year in South America. So one of the reasons that I was looking to change jobs was just to be at home more often. Missed a lot of bedtimes, a lot of dinners, a lot of weekends with the kids. Either I'm there, or I'm getting ready for work, or I'm coming back from a different time zone. This job, I still would be traveling, and I miss it to some degree, because the differences of doing this by Zoom versus going to a conference and going for a work dinner or having cocktail with a colleague, getting to know each other in that way, is something I miss. But yeah, I went from Super Elite 100K to like the grocery store seems like an outing. So it's been and like before the pandemic, I never met with a politician or policymaker or senior bureaucrat or regulator ever virtually.
Yeah.
It's always been an in-part.
Old school.
You come in, you go through security, they check your credentials, you shake hands, you're offered coffee or whatever, you sit down, you have your meeting, and then there's usually the kind of after you chatting as you're walking back to the elevator or whatever, or there's receptions where everyone congregates to have drinks and chat, but it was never done virtually ever. Like it was, you never would even think to try to get a member of parliament. It's like, you want to meet with me, come to me. That was always we run around town sort of thing. So it's been it's been a big change in that regard.
So out of all the places that you've had to travel to for your job, where would you say are your favorite places, and which places were you the most surprised by?
I was really surprised by South America, just generally. I really enjoyed being there. I guess I was surprised by Colombia, and I was in been to both Bogota and Cartagena, and I was surprised with Cartagena how safe it was, how
Yeah.
pleasant the people were, like how great the food was, how inexpensive it was. Cartagena is sort of like their version of like the French Riviera.
Wow.
It's kind of
Beautiful.
so it's very. I really like Chile, Santiago. I've been to a number of times. I really like Chile as a country. Um, so I guess I was just surprised by South America because the first time I say I'm going to, I can't think the first country I went to was Uruguay or Brazil, and reaction from family. Well, you got to be really careful in South America. That sort of stigma.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed South America. I think it's like I would take my family to Chile and go tour the wine
Yeah.
country and
Yeah.
great food and Santiago is a great city. I was really surprised by I was in Amman, Jordan in
Yeah.
October of 2019.
Yeah.
And Jordan is just this Hashemite kingdom of Jordan. It's surrounded by Syria and Iraq, and
Okay.
it's it's a monarchy, but it's a stable country,
Yeah.
and it's safe, and like we got picked up from the airport by a female Uber driver. I did not expect that my first time in the Middle East, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't expect that either.
Yeah, I mean, and it's so I've really enjoyed kind of all my travel, but I guess if it's just one place that it was just really take the family back to would be Australia. Just seeing the koalas and all that sort of stuff was
Yeah.
pretty cool. But
Yeah.
yeah, so I had a lot of interesting opportunities. I walked the Great Wall in China. I went to Petra in Jordan. Got the opportunity to do some pretty cool things, but they were always sort of done with colleagues as opposed to family. So travel was just family, and I would go to Mexico once a year. So we were in Mexico last March 17th. We came home. So we came
Wow.
home during the pandemic, just
Yeah.
kind of really kicking off, and
Yeah.
we got like one of the last vacations in, but. There's a lot to see out there, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And I've certainly enjoyed getting to know South America. Is a place that I met a lot of friends and would gladly go back.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, like, would you say that Mexico right now still seems like a fairly safe place, COVID wise? Because it seems like everyone's traveling there. It seems like they're doing a good job with regards to keeping the numbers down compared to us, for example.
Yeah, when things were really starting to get bad last March in like Spain and Italy, I remember seeing that on the news while we were outside of Cancun, the Mayan Riviera, and there were no cases in Mexico at that time. There was definitely the buzz that the resort was. A lot of people were just getting up and leaving.
Yeah.
Luckily. I have a friend that works at Global Affairs, so I just sort of asked him, I'm like, we're due to come back on the 17th. Like, should I be trying to get back sooner? And the advice was, you could look, but my options were going through the U.S., going through D.C., going through Dulles, going through Reagan. I don't like going through those airports on a good day.
Yeah.
So I think we felt safe just because of the nature of those all-inclusives at Mexico's. We're all outside at the beach or the pool, and then you go for dinner and it's kind of an open-air restaurant. So I don't know how Mexico's doing by the numbers. It would probably really depend on the region because Mexico City has almost the same population as Canada.
Yeah.
But if you get into more rural or more touristy areas, it's a lot of it is about being outside, so I think that's a benefit. But I haven't been following what's happening in Mexico closely. But when we left, COVID wasn't a thing in Mexico. When we got back into Canada, grocery stores were empty, and of course, what do you do before a trip? You clean out your fridge, right?
Yeah,
So that was
a challenge. Finding toilet
yeah,
paper.
There's everyone was baking, so there was no flour on the shelves.
Yeah. Jeez, man. Oh, what a crazy time we've been in. So what are some things that you're working on right now? Anything that you want to kind of like discuss or tell our listeners about?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think what we're really looking at is post-COVID economic recovery, and I think my sector, the sector I represent, has fared very well during COVID because agriculture has to continue, right? Primary agriculture has to continue. the province of Saskatchewan produces enough food to feed Canada for 3 years every growing season. We are very blessed to be in this country in the food side of things. And again, I think what we talked about before. A lot of groups are going to the federal government, hat in hand. We need help, and some of them very legitimately. My office building here is attached to a Hilton. It's pretty quiet over there. So I think tourism and restaurants. There's a lot of groups that are there that need financial support. They need help, whatever. And I think the way we're trying to differentiate is we have opportunity to unleash, to do even more, to grow even more. We exported $11.6 billion worth of product in 2020. We can do more in 2021 if we're enabled to do so. So what we're really trying to do is again, be constructive, be solutions oriented, and present growth opportunities. And that's how I try to differentiate us. And like I said at the outset, there's 6,400, how many more meetings there are. There's 6,400 federal registered lobbyists, just federally, getting all the provinces to be at the top. We discussed, pleased to be included in the top 100 for 2021. Those 6,400, you have to do things differently, right? And I think we've been there with, looking forward, being constructive, saying, if we can, modernize this regulation, if we can reduce some of the red tape, if we can incentivize innovation, we can do more. And I think one thing that a couple things that we're excited for is a way to we're working on the biofuels regulations, which is canola can be used as a feedstock to be blended into diesel to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So we're working on those regulations right now. It's good for the environment. It means farmers have another opportunity to market their crop, and it's good for the economy because it's a value added. It's production here. Health Canada just released their, which again in the health industry, might be perceived by some as controversial, but Health Canada released their consultation around dealing with what we call plant breeding innovation, but basically how do you create the plants that we plant using gene editing. And for me, gene editing is really exciting because it's you can silence a gene, you can insert foreign DNA into a gene to be more innovative, to have more disease resistance, to have better nutritional properties. Like cooking oils that have omega-3s in it, for example, is something that could be done quite easily with canola, for example. So that's exciting. Looking at trade diversification, I sit on the board of directors. We're focused on trade. But really, we're trying to say at any opportunity, we need to modernize, we need to innovate. Agriculture, 1 in 8 jobs are agriculture. It's we're bigger than auto or aerospace combined. And the same lens you apply to those groups need to be applied to us. To say that your cell phone innovation is good, but the way you do agriculture, no, we want the American Gothic photo picture of folks with a pitchfork. And with a very urban, suburban government, the way that agriculture is done now is way more sustainable than it was 100 years ago. We've got GIS. There's, it's precision. They're not tilling the land. They know where things run off. They know where they don't. So a lot of it's just been about growth and doing even more. I mean, canola is a $30 billion industry alone, and we can do more. And how do we do that and deal with the price of carbon increasing? You just went up April 1st again, right? And for farmers, they don't have an option. It's you got to drive, you got to do what you have to do to get your crop or your livestock to market.
Awesome, man. That was a fantastic rundown, and I really do appreciate the time that you spent with me today, kind of going over everything. You've definitely given me some really good insights to think about, and I'm sure our listeners are going to really appreciate it. But yeah, so what I'm going to do is I'll get your contact information later, and when I post up this video, I'm going to link it in the description, so that way people can kind of look you up and research a little bit more into what you do, and kind of if they want to find you, they can find you very easily. But Dave, I appreciate your time, buddy. So AWL listeners, make sure that you like the video, subscribe, turn on the bell notification icon, and if you want to see something new, leave a comment below, and we really appreciate your time. So Dave, I appreciate you, buddy. Thank you so much.
Oh, thanks for having me. And again, just to all your listeners, just be your own advocate, right? No one's going to do it for you. Build those relationships. They will serve you as long as they're genuine. Build a genuine relationship that's, and don't only go to talk to them when there's an issue. Right?
Yeah.
Build that relationship, and then when there's a fire, they'll be there to help you put it out. But relationships require maintenance, right? So just make sure that it's don't go one off when there's an issue. Do it regularly, do it annually, and it'll pay dividends,
Awesome.
right? Because even if an issue comes across your local MP's desk and they know that you have an interest in that sector, they might reach out to you as a resource, and that's kind of the ultimate place to be. So just advocate for yourself, because otherwise, don't expect others to do it for you, right?
Exactly.
And those that get up and stand up for themselves, I think will be. Will always have been, but especially now will be the ones that are better off.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, I totally agree with you. All right, man. Yeah, well, it's time to sign off. I'll talk to you soon, buddy.
All right, have a great day, John.
All right, peace.